If you're trying to figure out how to actually integrate AI across your software lifecycle, not just in one-off projects, QCon AI in New York this December 16th and 17th might be worth checking out. The entire conference is focused on the real-world side of scaling AI. You'll learn from technical leaders, senior engineers, and architects who've already been through it, the patterns that worked, the ML ops pipelines that scaled, and what they do differently. The conference is built for senior practitioners who need actionable blueprints, not just buzzwords. Learn more at QCon.ai.
Hello everybody, I'm InfoQ Podcasts, an InfoQ editor, and I have in front of me Magdalena. She has a lot of experience in AI, both professionally but also from the academic space. So I'll not spend too much time talking about it, and I'll ask Magdalena to introduce herself.
Hi, Olympia, and thanks you for having me here. I'm someone on a mission to make AI more accessible, and I try to do it in all possible ways. I think one way to do it is to help companies implement AI projects that really matter and optimize processes. But the other way to do it is to educate the next generation of employees and AI developers how to build AI solutions that actually work, that actually solve our problems. So this is my academic part to mention. I just try to bring those two worlds together, hopefully towards a future where we have AI that is enabling us rather than annoying.
Great, thank you, because I think that's quite important these days, as I have a feeling that everybody moves towards idiocracy, given that they just say that, okay, we have AI to do everything, we don't have to do nothing, so then we just drop it. And that, on the other hand, Europe usually had a problem bringing academia together with the commercial side of things. And I think it's important to have people that are involved into both. So let's rewind a bit. We are almost 2 or 3 years, 3 years, I think, since Pandora's box was open. And now out of a sudden, we have pretty much everybody in the IT sector or even in any company wanting to do more with AI, even though what they mean by AI is generative AI. And I had a conversation with somebody else involved with generative AI for a long period of time, Jade Abbott, and she was talking about the need of changing your mindset. Because if you think like an engineer, a software engineer, or any other engineer, you'll think binary. The things are either 0 or 1. There is no gradient between it. But on the other hand, she was saying, and I totally agree with her, is that in the world of machine learning, there is a gradient. Some things can be 80% true or less or more, and then that we need to just envision something that continuously evolves and not only it's either true or false. What's your experience with it?
Yeah, I can totally relate. I think the key problem with Gen AI, with LLMs, is that there is not very often no ground truth. And software engineers, we're so used to having what you mentioned, binary outputs. It either works or it doesn't. And if it doesn't, then I can go back to my code and see why it doesn't work, which part doesn't work, what's the problem with the input and output. You can really pinpoint it back to the very specific point. And now with Gen AI, when you don't have the ground truth, at the very best case, you have human preferences, right? Like, this sounds better, I prefer this answer. But this might not even be uniform across all humans, cultures, or even divisions in the company. But I think the problem is also you cannot pinpoint the problem back to the one specific place in the code. It is not working, but systemically, why is it not working? It's like a kind of black box that we're operating with. And the only thing you see is the inputs and outputs, and you cannot really debug it. And I think that's what your colleague meant, right? There is a spectrum, but you don't necessarily, not only it's a spectrum, but you're also not able even to identify why. And I think this is really challenging for many people working with Gen AI.
One of the reasons that got me to your area of interest and the points that you had in terms of validation and machine learning and AI, so to say, is the fact that in the last 2 years, I was looking for something to allow me to do something that we call testing, right? So validation, I think it's the more appropriate word.
Evals, very often people talk about evals.
And what I was telling at some point, I think last year, I was talking at a conference about the dangers of over-relying on a generative AI, the fact that you don't have, as you said, the same answer if you ask the same question twice and over again the same point. And what I was saying at that point, thinking the conclusion is like, create a space around your system and just evaluate for the output of the system and then create ranges. So do you have any battle stories, war stories? Because you said you're supporting somebody that allows us to understand better how you see the things, or we'll just go in the more techie stuff. What do you prefer?
Okay, so imagine this, like 900,000 Swiss francs saved every year.
Okay.
10,000 employee hours saved annually. 34% productivity boost. And all this came from a Gen AI model we implemented. But actually, it came down to just 3 words. But the interesting part is, that like you get this result, you get like almost 1 million saving thanks to 3 words. But that's not how it starts. Actually, like for us, it started with struggle. So we were implementing, a chatbot for a customer, and we were kind of stuck at 60% accuracy. Like we were drowning in hallucinations. It was like 2 years back at the very beginning of Gen AI era, so it was much worse than it's now. We were trying dozens of different system prompts, and like nothing worked. We would fix one thing, but then it would break another component. And it's like all interconnected and you don't understand how and why. And the time was short and the budget was tight and it was getting tighter and we were like not getting anywhere, like more prompts, fixing this, breaking that. And I think we were stuck in this mode until we realized that we were solving the wrong problem. We didn't need better prompts. We didn't need more prompts. We needed a system to find the prompts that work. And I think that's what testing, that's what Evals is about, right? It's not about finding this perfect combination of your data and the instructions and generating the output you want, but it's like about having a system that allows you to iterate quickly through your ideas, but also through like model versions that are evolving so quickly, data that is evolving on your side or on customer side, and being able to combine it all together and very quickly see what works and what doesn't.
Okay. What's the recipe for success? How should you approach it as a solution architect, a company, no technical person? Because obviously nowadays with AI, everybody can do everything and we're just watching the screen.
So I think for people coming from software background, what is very helpful concept is like data-driven development, or I think you would call it test-driven development. And I would call it in this context, data-driven development. So instead of, like asking yourself, like, what's the best model that I can use and what data do I feed in what system, I would actually start with the user perspective. What does the user expect from the application, from the chatbot? And then translate it back to the test cases that you can automate, test at scale. One concept that I find like super helpful for this is what I call a coverage matrix. So basically in your coverage matrix, you want to understand the business impact of different types of questions or problems that people will come to the Gen AI with. It's matrix because you can identify multiple dimensions. So let's say you're working on some customer-facing chatbots, and you might have 2 segments, new customers or returning customers. But then on the other hand, you also have different questions types. Maybe you have questions about billing or general questions about the product, or maybe there are some technical implementation details that the customer needs to have. So in coverage matrix, I think we can put a link to some example below, what you will see is, what percentage of the questions come from new customers and from returning customers? What percentage of the questions are billing? And what percentage are technical? And what percentage are generic? And basically, this allows you to see kind of the distribution, the spectrum of what is important for the end user. So I would say this is the first stage, to understand like what you're working with. And ideally, like you have it from some existing application from logs. And if you don't have it, like you try to get it from customer interviews. And then what I would add to this is actually business importance. So one thing is the frequency, but another thing is what value does solving this specific query generate? And I bet, that solving problems of new customers about the product is very valuable because it logs them in and it keeps them. And maybe it's more important than solving a billing issue for the customer that's been with you for 2 years. So the idea is that you have, on one hand, the spectrum of how the distribution of the problems, and on the other hand, business importance. And then you multiply one by another to see basically which test cases should you build first.
So let me break it down from my software engineer mindset. So you mentioned test-driven development, and that's something that usually drives for an improved architecture for a system. And then you said that we can start with what users already did, either extracting them from the logs or extracting them from the interviews and build it from there. In my mind, the picture that was drawn was the following. You have different types of things plotted maybe on a graph with the types of questions that you have. And I'd expect things to get clustered. You have pretty much the same things, but you have then the outliers. What are you doing with those guys that are doing something else? In which category do they fit in? Or we are just initially looking at the whole spectrum and then cluster them in the different types of categories, looking at, I don't know, somebody asking, as you said, about pricing, or it's something that will happen in the next iteration?
So I think the first question is like, are you even able to identify it, right? Because some of these things we will just see in the production and then there is nothing you can do about it. But let's say you have this in production, you're able to identify it. What I would claim is that even if it's, 1 in 10,000, right? If it has a high business value for you, high business impact, you should take it into account. So that's why you look not only at the proportion, right? 1 in 10,000, but also at the value of solving this problem for this particular outlier. I don't know, let me give you an example, right? Building a chatbot for a wine fair. People come and they want to buy some wine. Probably most of them will be like amateurs, bring home 1 to 6 bottles. But 1 in 1,000 maybe will be like a big chains of restaurants, right? That suddenly wants to place an order that is like 1,000 bottles monthly. Mm-hmm. This is someone who behaves very differently as just one-off, but he has more value than hundreds of other users.
So then what I hear you saying is that focus on the business metric that matters rather than just treating everybody individually. And then if you find that one-off, that will allow you to look at it differently, and then you can just provide all the needed value to your business. And that's one important aspect that you have to bear in mind.
Exactly, right? So ideally, you want to be able to quantify the value of solving this specific case for this specific problem in terms of your business KPIs. So I guess in the wine example, it's just like revenue, like they care how many bottles they sell. Basically, then I would prioritize the test cases based on the expected revenue than solving each case generates.
That's something that will make a lot of people from the financial side very happy. It's a good ROI for these kind of things. Yeah, great. Okay, we have written our test. What are we doing next?
Okay, if you have written your test, and I really congratulate you, because for me it's easily, 4-6 weeks of work to have this good coverage. Basically, once you have your test and then you implement your pipeline, your agent or your chatbot, then you start running combinations of your system prompts with some data formatting. And honestly, you just see what works, what doesn't. You test ideas. Like for us, in this anecdote I mentioned to you, that we've seen such a huge boost, it's because, we added 3 words to every system prompt. But to be able to add 3 words to the system prompts, I think we tried hundreds of them. And you can only try hundreds of them. You have really well-designed test cases that are fully automated.
I have to ask it because it's in my head and goes over and over again. Do you write the test or do you generate it? Because now it's very popular that you generate everything. You just ask Gen AI to just generate a test for you and you don't do nothing.
I mean, you can generate the tests, right? But you still need this human to basically transform whatever user told you to the numeric value. And there's no way I can do it for you.
Okay, so what I hear you saying loud and clear is keep the human in the loop. Make sure that somebody validates the input, because in the end, you're responsible for what you're gonna use, regardless of the tool that you're gonna use to have the tests being written.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay. For a long period of time, everybody was focusing on the first L, large. Then we had a turnaround and we said, okay, we can put a S in front of the LLM and we have small large language models, which was an oxymoron, more or less. Then everybody was saying that use something in the cloud because it's impossible to run it on your local machine. Now it's more and more possible to do it in smaller machines. A lot of things happened, especially this year. DeepSeek showed that there are alternatives for the huge GPUs. A lot of things are giving a lot of options. I feel like in a restaurant and I don't know where to eat. Everything will satisfy my body's need with more or less calories, but which one is the best option for me?
I think this is a very common problem, right, for us geeks, nerds, techies, that there is so much out there and this is the new stuff and we should try the latest model. And like, oh my God, did you see the Gemini context window? It's so big and the flash is so fast. But like, wait, OpenAI has the 5th version of GPT, right? Like, shall we try it all? But I think it starts with the wrong question, actually, because at the end of the day, you're solving a problem for someone. And this problem of someone is probably very rarely what type of model is behind us. It's more like, am I getting the answers? Are the answers precise enough? Is there too much hallucinations? Is this in the reasonable range? Maybe latency is the issue. So I think like if you encode all that matters for your users in the tests, then you will actually see which tests perform poorly. I think here we go back to your question of spectrum, right? You will have a lot of tests that are not like pass or fail, but they have some probability attached to them, right? And it's up to you to interpret it. And once you have this test, you can quickly pinpoint the issues. And let's say, latency is an issue for you, right? Then, okay, you either spin out bigger cluster in the cloud or you make a smaller model. Let's say smaller model is cheaper, so we want to try it out. So once you have very well-tested application, you will basically just switch the model version in your code and you run your tests. And that's all you have to do to see if it solves your problem.
Okay, so then that means that we should abstract away the model. So you have the application itself and then the model is one of the moving parts. You have a nice interface and then you just play around and see how the things are working or not in the frame that you had in mind, right?
Yeah, and you see actually does this solve this problem, right, that you were trying to tackle.
Okay. We discussed in a very abstract way about verification and testing. Are there any tools that you can recommend for using, or everybody's building their own tool and they can play with it?
There are tools, and I think it's actually tricky because the universe is evolving so quickly. I'll give you some names today. Like, I really like DeepEval. I really like OPIG. Some people love Evidently AI, MLflow, LangFuse, right? And there is something from OpenAI that was published a few months back. One feedback that I'm hearing from my colleagues, from other developers, is that it's kind of difficult to choose a tool because it's evolving so quickly. And whatever your needs are today, it might not be the same tomorrow, and the tooling also evolves. So I think we can put a link to the playbook where I do some comparison of the tooling, of what you can do. You have features like experiment tracking, evaluation framework, custom metrics, human evaluation, prompt management, observability, tracing, and so on, right? But just like bear in mind, whatever is there, it's valid as of today, and in 6 months, it's been very different.
Yeah, we'll treat it like a Schrödinger's cat. It's either in the box or it's not in the box, and we all know that. You mentioned a couple of interesting points. You mentioned about the evaluation, and that's what we touched upon. But then there is the other point, observability. That's getting more and more important because people are moving more into developing now and we are deploying it now. You need to see what the customer is doing. And observability is obviously a tool that gained a lot of momentum lately. But as you said, AI is a black box. How do you observe a black box?
That's an excellent question. At the end of the day, you don't observe the black box, right? You want to observe users in front of the black box. You want to see how people interact with your application. So I think all observability metrics at the end of the day, you try to understand whether you're solving the problem from the users, whether you're keeping them engaged in more like salesy context. And I think this you can see from the logs, from like, how do the conversations go, right? Where do the conversations stall? When do the people stop asking questions? Is it because the problem was solved? Or is it because, they asked the same thing 5 times in 5 different ways and it got to nowhere?
That's a good answer. Don't observe the car, observe the way how you interact with it and the way how it's interacting back. Great. What else should have I asked you what I didn't?
It's a good one. I think one challenge I see from developers is to transform the business KPI into the code. We're very used to getting our tickets that are very well specified. If they are not precise, like you're a node, your project manager, something is wrong. But here it's like you have a big challenge of looking at the business side and then transform it into something mathematical. And I think this is where a lot of people will find the biggest value if they actually start trying out this process. Like try to capture the business in the code with the formulas, with the metrics behind your levels.
That's very important. It's something that I was preaching for a long period of time, understanding the customer and solving the customer's problem, not the problem that you'd like the customers to have. And thank you for saying that. Thank you for all the insights, Magdalena. And let's see where this takes us.
Thank you so much, Olympia, for having me here.